California District 20 Congressional Debate. Live from the KSPW Action News 8 studios. Here are your moderators, KSPW 8 news anchors Dan Green and Aaron Clark.
All right, welcome back to our congressional debate. We're going to move to some national issues now.
One of these issues, this issue I know is paramount to both of you and certainly to this region, and that's immigration. What are we going to do about immigration? It is a multifaceted issue. It is a big issue. Casey, we're going to start with you, and I think you both have different approaches, so I think this will be a good discussion. So Casey, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you. This is a multifaceted issue, and in fact, our largest industry here on the Central Coast is agriculture. So the way I have tackled this issue is to say, let's look at H-2A visa reform and make sure that our farmers can get the workforce that they need. I would also take that one step further to say that it's not just making sure that they get the labor force that they need, but that labor force also needs workforce housing. The farmers also need water, and they also need investments in transportation to be able to move those goods. I think the way that we address all of those issues and really see immigration not just as a standalone issue, but as a network of issues, the way that we address all of that is through the Department of Homeland Security. Within the Department of Homeland Security, there is an Office for Critical Infrastructure Protection. And I would say that we need to elevate our region to be part of that Office of Critical Infrastructure Protection. Right now, that office identifies certain industries for critical protection for national security. And agriculture is listed as an industry because of food security and food safety. We want to protect our agriculture and our goods and services that move. We grow enough food here to feed the entire country. So we want to protect that. But I would say we can't just look at the industry. We have to look at the region where that food is being produced. And then by doing so, it makes it easier for us to tackle the immigration problem as well as water, roads, and housing.
Jimmy?
In my discussions with the men and women in agriculture, they will tell you, look, yes, water is an issue, but let me tell you the most pressing issue. And that's making sure that we have a labor force here to make us the #1 industry in this area. But it's not just about farmers, it's about farm workers. And in order to address both of those, we need comprehensive immigration reform. I have said that from the very beginning because I'm from here. I've seen the effect of immigration and immigration reform. As the grandson of an Italian immigrant, I know that we should give people the opportunity to come here and provide their children with a better life. It takes comprehensive immigration reform. People have asked me, they've told me, well, how are you going to do that? You're so optimistic. You bet I'm optimistic because it's been done before. Senate Bill 744 back in 2013. They passed comprehensive immigration reform that dealt with border security. It dealt with with visas, not just with H-2A, but H-1B, providing jobs not just in the Salinas Valley, but about Silicon Valley. It provided a pathway to citizenship, a very difficult pathway to citizenship, 13 years worth of a path, bringing the 11 million undocumented out of the shadows into our community. And the fourth thing it dealt with was investment in youth jobs. It's a compromise. That's what we need to focus on, making sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform, having a president who's willing to do it, a speaker of their house who's willing to roll sleeves up, and your representative who's willing to do the same thing.
May I respond?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is an important difference between myself and my opponent. Jimmy supports comprehensive immigration reform, as do I, but he doesn't explain how a freshman representative is going to get a Senate bill passed, a bill from 3 or 4 years ago. The way I tackle comprehensive immigration reform is through visa reform. Nationwide, the ag industry needs over 3 million H-2A visas, and Congress has set the cap at 140,000. The first thing I would do as a representative is remove that cap.
And but as a junior congresswoman, do you have that power?
Yeah. Absolutely. As a member of the majority party, being a Republican and in the majority party, therefore we'll have more authority over committee assignments and agendas and what bills actually get through Congress. And I would also add that as a woman and a member of the Women's Caucus, I'll be able to get things done. In fact, women only make up 19% of the members of the House, but they pass 60% of the legislation.
You want to respond?
Let's talk about that majority party. That majority party is the majority party that blocked comprehensive immigration reform after the Senate passed it. It's not about being just a part of the majority. It's about developing relationships in order to get things done. The Republican majority, as we have seen, unfortunately, has not only blocked immigration reform, but blocked equal pay for equal work. It's blocked a Supreme Court justice. It's blocked many things that has led to the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. We need representatives who are willing to go back there, be optimistic, roll up their sleeves, and not just talk about things, but fight to get things done.
A lot of talk about bringing refugees from Syria and vetting people who want to come to this country, vetting immigrants. I want to know where you stand on it. We're tight. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Casey?
30 seconds.
On vetting.
On vetting Syrian refugees.
Or any other
On any refugees. In fact, Syria is one of the largest global crises right now. There are tens of millions of people being displaced. I think we have an obligation as the greatest country on earth to welcome those individuals who are fleeing for their lives. And we do need to work with Border Patrol, with the Department of Homeland Security, and make sure that they're properly vetted. And so far, the cap is set at 10,000, and I think we're starting to reach that cap. But I think we really have to look at this issue both from a security perspective, but also from a compassion perspective.
Jimmy, you feel the same way?
Yes. I mean, look, the Statue of Liberty says, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. That we need to live up to that principle when it comes to Syrian refugees. But at the same time, we need to be assured that they are properly vetted. We do have a robust vetting system in place right now. It takes close to 18 to 24 months to do it. During that time, background checks by our intelligence agencies, biometric checks, fingerprinting, interviews, a number of steps that one has to take before they're properly vetted to come into our country.
And so the issue at the end of the day comes down to security, which has come to light in the sanctuary city issue. Aaron?
Which is an interesting issue because it's not as clear cut as I think some would have us believe. So first of all, I want to get your views on it, whether you support sanctuary cities, and then we'll get into a little bit of the nitty gritty on why it is a little more gray than perhaps black and white. Jimmy, first of all, do you support sanctuary cities?
Yeah, look, anybody who commits a felony, a violent felony, should not be allowed to hide in a sanctuary city. However, you have to realize that that's not why cities impose sanctuaries. They do that because we have 11 million undocumented people living in our country. People that need to be taken out of the shadows, brought out of the shadows, and we can do that with comprehensive immigration reform. These are people who want to live their lives, yet they get caught with a minor ticket like you or me, and that happens. They get arrested. What happens? They can be deported. They shouldn't be deported for small issues like that. So I understand why cities do provide those sanctuaries, but you have to realize that it needs to be thought of as what types of crimes are committed in order for them to be protected.
Casey?
No, I do not support sanctuary cities.
Period.
Period.
End of story. What should be done with in a sanctuary city? The situation, for example, what we have in San Francisco. What should be done in that scenario? Should you cut off funding to San Francisco from a federal level?
No, I don't think it's wise to cut off federal funding to a city that declares itself a sanctuary city. There may be some areas where the federal government has leverage in terms of border security, but I don't think you want to cut off all federal funding. For example, for recreation or for health subsidies or for women's health issues. So that's such a broad statement to say we're going to cut off funding for sanctuary cities, and quite frankly, it's just not practical or wise to do that. But I think this is where the federal government and the House of Representatives has to be wise and figure out what leverage they have with those cities.
All right.
All right, we're going to move on to another really big topic, but it's always one that's interesting. Get a lot of interesting opinions on it. That's the Affordable Care Act that the federal government has imposed, and the states are now trying to implement. And it's been, at varying degrees of success, I guess would be a fair way of saying that. So, Casey, I think it's Casey's turn. I'm going to start with you. First of all, tell us what you think about the Affordable Care Act, how it's being executed, and what we could do better.
Yes. The Affordable Care Act is broken, so it needs to be fixed. And here I will say, I disagree with my party. When my party says repeal and replace, I don't agree with that because I haven't heard what the replacement is. On the other hand, many Democrats want to expand it into a single payer system, and I don't agree with that either. I think we really need to look at the Affordable Care Act, which has provided health care to 19 million Americans who weren't previously insured, but there are still 33 million Americans who are left out, and we need to make sure that they get health coverage. We also need to make sure that premiums aren't going up and making health care unaffordable for those who do have insurance. I think the way to address this is to look at the 10 MECs. The MECs are the mandatory essential coverage requirements. So the federal government came out with this list of 10, says everyone has to have these 10 essential coverage requirements in their healthcare package, in their insurance, and that's what has made it so expensive. I think we need to get that list from 10 to 2, and the 2 should be preventative care and catastrophic care.
Jimmy?
I was speaking with an emergency room doctor about a couple months ago up in Santa Cruz, and he said, I love the Affordable Care Act. Why? Because everybody comes to see me and they don't go and see their preventive care doctor. That needs to change. The Affordable Care Act has done an amazing job in meeting its goal of giving more people insurance. 19 million, that's correct. But right here in Monterey County, the uninsured rate has dropped from 21% to 9%. There's no more spending caps by insurance companies. Pre-existing conditions are accepted. Mental health is accepted. It's done a lot, but more needs to be done. We cannot repeal it. It must be repaired. Yes, it's very expensive. Yes, it is hurting small businesses. So how do we make it more accessible? How do the insured have more access to their doctors? First thing, I would consider and push for a $5,000 tax credit for out-of-pocket expenses. Second thing, I would make sure that there are more incentives for younger, healthier people to get involved. Third, we need to allow Medicare to negotiate directly with our pharmaceutical companies. And lastly, we need to make a way so that our doctors accept the ACA and that we have more doctors here in Monterey County. You talk to doctors, they will tell you this is a difficult place to live. We need to make sure that there are incentives for them to come here, serve here, and stay here.
Go ahead.
I would add to that if we want doctors to accept the Affordable Care Act, we need to really look at raising the reimbursement rates. Their reimbursement rates are so low right now that they are actually discouraged from accepting covered California. And the best way to really move this kind of money around is to get the drug companies and the insurance companies out of the way and give them less power and less control over this Affordable Care Act reform.
I want to tell you, since we're talking about money, let's talk about taxes. Our federal deficit has climbed significantly. We have a debt to service. At the same time, we have Americans that are trying to live day to day. First of all, where do you think we are on taxes? And based on that, what do you think we ought to do about it? We'll start with you, Jimmy.
Look, I think that the current tax code needs to be reformed. Because right now, with these loopholes and these unnecessary deductions, you have secretaries paying a higher tax rate than millionaires and billionaires. So when you look at that, we first thing need to look at these millionaires and billionaires, make sure they pay their fair share, make sure these loopholes are gone and these unnecessary deductions are removed. Then we need to look at the middle class. We need to make sure that they receive the proper deductions and tax credits for working hard, commuting, health care, child care, higher education credits. And third, we need to look at corporations. We cannot have corporations who receive tax credits and then go to another state or another country to avoid paying their taxes. We cannot have these companies that switch headquarters to other countries to avoid paying taxes. There should be an exit tax. They should be penalized for doing that.
Casey?
Well, I would ask my opponent what pay your fair share means, because I think this is just a political one-liner that politicians use, but it doesn't really mean anything. And when I think about taxes, I look at our small businesses that are right here on the Central Coast that are just being hammered by taxes and regulations. And they all tell me it is so hard to run a business here in California because there are constantly inspections, there are licensing, taxes, fees, There's new labor laws, new regulations coming into play all the time. It makes it very difficult for people to run a business. And if they can't be successful in their business, then they can't hire. And if they can't hire, then people can't have good paying jobs. And then they can't pay taxes. So the way that we fix this problem is to make sure that our businesses can be successful.
There's going to be tough decisions, though. I mean, when we talk about the federal budget, it's eaten up a lot by entitlements. There's not a lot of wiggle room, so to speak. So when we talk about things, you can't, you have to figure out a way to pay for them.
Yes.
And that will require difficult decisions.
Great question. So if we really want to rein in our federal spending, we have to look at our discretionary spending. And the largest pot of spending is within the Department of Defense. And as a veteran and as a national security expert, I understand the need to have a strong military. But unfortunately, we don't always have efficiency in the Department of Defense. And I'll give you an example of how I would reform DoD to save the federal government money. Right now, DoD is organized geographically. So across the globe, we've divided the region, divided the globe into regions. So we have an Africa Command, an Asia Command, a North America, South America, European Command, and all of those commands essentially have their own military. They have equipment, platforms, personnel, headquarters, infrastructure, everything that goes with them. So it's like we have 6 little militaries, actually 6 large militaries, all over the world. But when you think about the threats that we face as a nation, when you think about climate change, when you think about cybersecurity and counterterrorism, those things are not bound by geography. They're not going to stay nice and neat within that region. So I believe we need to just get rid of that regional structure and move to a functional structure within DoD that will really cut costs of DoD, cut discretionary spending, and get us back to a balanced budget.
Jimmy, where do you want to cut? You want to cut DoD? If so, if not, where? Or do you want to cut it all?
Look, when it comes to the deficit, everything should be on the table. Okay, defense, non-discretionary, taxes, and yes, entitlement. But it comes down to making sure that we bring people together to talk about where it should be cut. Now, it's easy just to say defense. Now, if you look at the recent budget put forward by the Republican Speaker, Paul Ryan, he didn't cut anything from defense. In fact, he added to it by taking away from the overseas contingency operations, the emergency funds. That's a shell game. You don't do that. You need to have everything on the table. Everybody needs to be at the table in order to come up with these decisions where the proper cuts need to be made, where the proper taxes need to be imposed as well.
I'd like to ask for clarification because Jimmy just started off by saying everything should be on the table, including taxes and entitlements, which sounds to me like his plan would be to raise taxes and cut Social Security.
All right, well,
right.
Is it?
Look, once again, everything needs to be there. The last time they balanced the budget in the 90s, they raised taxes, they made severe cuts. People need to realize it takes risk, political risk, to balance a budget like our U.S. government. That's what needs to be done. But before you sit there and say, yes, I want to raise taxes, yes, I want to make cuts, we need to figure out what areas those have to be done in.
All right. We're going to take another break. We're going to be back with more and closing statements as well when we return in our Commitment 2016 special, our congressional debate for District 20 here on the Central Coast.